What was ruined for everyone by one single person? I worked at a froyo place, and after a certain number of visits, you would get a free cup. Technically, the rule was up to $5. However, the owner of the store was really generous and said, nah, if they come in here that often, then they should get their one cup free. For a few years, it was going well since it's self serve and based on weight. Most people were careful about making their cups and never really overfilling. Sometimes kids would be a little overzealous, but no one really did anything crazy. Eventually, one day, a guy who, in all honesty, was smart, I'll give him that, filled the cup to the brim, then added our waffle cone chips around the edges to create a barrier. He dispensed even more froyo, then made another wall on top of that. He did this about 6 times. To be honest, I was very invested and also just amazed at how he did this. The average price for a small that was decently filled with toppings, most people were in the $5 to $7 range. This dude managed to make this a $27 cup for free, because technically it just has to fit into that one cup. The owner asked me about that suspicious transaction and I told him all about it. He was like, oh, okay. Check the cameras, and even he was impressed. This dude ended up telling other people, who then told more people, and so on. At this point, our store was actually losing money on the free cups. It got worse because now people were trying to cram so many toppings into their cups that about 90% of the toppings would end up on the floor, so that was costing us even more. Eventually, we changed up the policy to the $5 max. People weren't happy, but we all gladly explained that people were getting out of hand and we were trying to do something nice, and it was just taken advantage of. The only thing I think that was more impressive than that froyo tower would be if he balanced it on his head and walked out without toppling it over. Story 2. In my role as a dialysis nurse, we introduced a new position to handle additional and emergency cases that came in later in the day. This role required working from noon to midnight, which helped reduce the need for a nurse to be on call every night to perhaps once or twice a week. The person in this role didn't have to take call duties and had weekends off. We enjoyed rotating through this role as it provided a break from being on call and allowed us to have weekends off. However, there was a nurse who started her shift at 7 a.m. instead of noon and finished at 5 p.m. When there was an additional or emergency case, she wouldn't answer her phone, which meant everyone else had to step in and cover the extra patients, putting us back on call. She continued this behavior every time it was her turn in the rotation, leading to the elimination of the position. As a result, we all went back to being on call all the time. Story 3. At the first hotel I worked at, employees were allowed to stay and have drinks at the hotel bar after their shifts ended. One evening, my coworker and I were chatting with 2 women who were guests at the hotel. We noticed the security guard giving us a disapproving look from the lobby, apparently assuming we had inappropriate intentions. Feeling insulted by his unfounded suspicion, we decided to end our night and leave. We exited through the back employees only door, and as we passed the security officer's office, we thought doing a prank on his door would be a fitting response to his unwelcome scrutiny. However, unbeknownst to us, the security guard had followed us out, using the hotel's second floor to stealthily reach the exit ahead of us. He stood quietly in the shadows of the second floor stairwell, watching as we vandalized his office door. As a result of what we did, employees at that hotel are no longer permitted to enjoy after-work drinks in the lobby bar. Story 4. Not technically one single person, but the Koch brothers. Back in the 70s and 80s, climate change wasn't political at all. Many companies that provided fuel and electricity were pretty much general energy companies. They invested in green energy technologies to have them developed, and pretty much everyone in the US agreed that humans were having an impact on the climate and that we should do something about it. There may have been some deniers, but the vast majority of the public and private businesses just accepted the facts being laid out by climate scientists. Then came the Koch brothers. I believe they were oil tycoons, and they are practically entirely responsible for the societal climate problems we have been dealing with ever since. They use their immense wealth and influence to undermine climate science via grassroots movements. They also undermine these generally accepted facts by any other means possible, using many of the same exact talking points we hear from climate deniers today, all so they could keep making money from oil. They quite literally planted seeds of doubt amongst all the people who would be the most affected by climate change, and it has lasted for decades. Because of this, these general energy companies often let go of their climate scientists, stopped investing in green energy research and development, as well as general climate change research, and subsequently became just oil companies again because the Koch brothers politicized climate change and made it unpopular to care about. The worst part is that since this time, humanity has put out more or less 50% of all the greenhouse gases ever put out in human industrial history. So yes, the Koch brothers ruined our planet and their actions may very well lead us all to our collective demise, or the demise of a lot more people. So the Koch brothers' approach to climate change, if we can't see it from our oil rig, it doesn't exist. A strategy that's about as effective as trying to stop a forest fire with a water spray. Story 5. My town is famous for having a nativity scene on the courthouse lawn. Several years ago, a local business owner wanted to display a Happy Winter Solstice banner on the courthouse lawn. This shouldn't have been an issue because a large nativity scene was put up every year, and the principle of separation of church and state should have made it an all-or-nothing situation. However, the county judge at the time was unreasonable and denied the application. So the business owner gathered support from other locals and partnered with an equal rights group. They took the case all the way up to the Supreme Court, which ruled in their favor, stating that it should be an all-or-nothing situation. Despite this ruling, the judge chose nothing. Many conservatives in the town rallied together and pressured the business owner to leave town. They still complain about her every year. One individual even started displaying a small nativity scene in the back of his old, rusty truck, parking it outside the courthouse in the winter. This is seen as a defiant gesture against the Supreme Court's ruling, but it's really just unsightly and bothersome. Our courthouse lawn looks quite sad as a result. However, we recently got a new county judge. One of the first things he did was to remove the parking space used by the truck owner and replace it with a nice garden. Story 6. When I first started teaching, I was such a lazy teacher. I was not an education major, so classroom management wasn't my strong suit. Luckily, I was given high school seniors, and around the last day of school, we just watched movies. My thought was, they've seen worse, why stick to PG Disney films? So I showed them National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation right before Christmas break. Kids loved it. They loved the raunchy humor, slapstick, and the cursing. No one said anything, in none of my 8 classes at least. Except many months later, around March, I get an email from another teacher that she wants to discuss the things little Jimmy has been saying about me. Turns out he mentioned that we watched R-rated films all the time. I got lucky the other kids had my back, but it was eye-opening. She could have gone to the principal and had me fired. Her and I talked to the kid and he admitted he exaggerated. Later on, she mentioned she messed up when she was a new teacher too. Around spring break, kids were excited about what film we'd watch before spring break. Originally, I felt like an action flick, but I told them my job was on the line. I played Remember the Titans. Great movie, but the kids groaned since they usually play that film. Story 7. When I was in 5th grade, me and my class went to science camp, essentially just camping in the middle of the woods for a week where we would do cool science experiments, learn to build a shelter, and other stuff. There were a bunch of high schooler counselors that we would rotate between each day, and one night, me and my cabin mates were with this one high school guy. Didn't know his real name because we all went by camp names like Tiger or Deer, stuff like that. I believe we called him Jupiter. Jupiter was a super cool dude, really nice, interactive, helpful, clearly liked his job, which was essentially just taking care of a bunch of 5th graders. One night when we were out on a night hike, he brought our group out to an open field outside the cafeteria. He told us he'd be right back, and a few minutes later had snuck into the closed cafeteria with a bunch of Oreo cookies and milk cartons for us. So we spent the rest of the night hike eating cookies and milk and stargazing. It was really cool of him, and it was just a beautiful night, one I still remember to this day. Of course, someone in our cabin had a snitch to another staff, which of course had Jupiter in a lot of trouble, which resulted in him sitting down with us, and it was really like one of those parental, I'm not mad, just disappointed kind of talks, which seriously made me mad at the kid who couldn't just keep their mouth shut and enjoy the moment. Story 8. At one of my jobs, they had an excellent bonus system. All employees got a yearly bonus of an extra month's pay, as well as an annual lump sum comprising a profit share. One middle-aged woman who had no children and a husband who traveled as part of his highly paid corporate career. Out of the blue, she started complaining about the bonus system, how terrible a place it was to work, and everything else she could think of. She lost the plot when one of the top management team slightly called out her name and then she escalated her behavior. The owner is an imperfect but pretty good man. He was led to believe that she was speaking up on behalf of the entire administration side, mostly female. She wasn't. He was so hurt and devastated that he changed the whole bonus structure completely, disadvantages to the lower tier of earners. Guess who moved states before bonus time that year? She knew she was leaving, she just decided to wreak havoc before leaving. Alright, so if you're feeling the same angry vibes that I'm feeling at the lady in the last story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. It really does help me out and it helps keeps the channel going sharing those kinds of stories with you. Let's go on to the next one. Story 9. I worked for a movie theater that had a loyalty program. For every dollar you spent, you earned 1 point. And different points can get you free stuff. So 50 points gets you a free popcorn, 100 gets you 2 free tickets, and all the way up to 250 points, where you get 2 free movie tickets, 2 large drinks, a large popcorn, and a candy. Then you would start back over at 0 points and repeat. That's a lot of money, but the movie theater is expensive, and points can easily accumulate. When you reach those point thresholds, when your receipt prints, a voucher prints afterward. They don't expire, and you can use them whenever you want. Someone, I assume a smart employee that no longer worked for the company, got a hold of the kind of printer we use and started printing those vouchers. We were able to figure out that a lot of the people that we would see regularly had a bunch of these vouchers and they were all ripped in a particular location. Each printer has a different rip-off point, kind of like a thumbprint for each individual printer. I took the liberty of going online and found this guy was printing them out in our similar format and selling them in bulk through Craigslist. We reported to the corporate office and we slowly took away the loyalty program. Every time we received a similar voucher, we would ask the patrons where they got it from. We even bribed them and said if they could give us information, we would honor the voucher. I don't know if they were ever caught, but the loyalty program was canceled for a long time. A new one took its place, but the benefits weren't as good. Story 10. Back when I was in 7th grade, we had a field trip to this campsite place that used to be part of the Underground Railroad. The trip was 5 days, and one optional activity was to reenact what it would have been like to use the railroad as an escaped servant. The people working there warned that it was realistic, and we had to sign a waiver saying we understood. The counselors worked as the servant owners, and we had to escape from them as they chased us. We'd slip into the Underground Railroad, and the activity was basically over. Some girls' parents sued the camp. The counselor would shout at us as we escaped to make it somewhat realistic. Real PG stuff. The worst was when they yelled something like, "Help, the servants are escaping," which is a bit edgy. Well, according to the girl, the counselor called them inappropriate words and all else beside. Since we were in groups of 5 and the other 4 girls refused to testify, they actually got away with some $5,000 settlement as they knew they couldn't prove that they didn't do anything that she said they did. The school no longer goes on field trips, which was a real pain for 8th and 9th grade. Story 11. Attending a Marilyn Manson concert a few years ago was an unforgettable experience. It was just a few days after he had collapsed on stage in Saskatchewan. My friend and I traveled to Vancouver for the concert, arriving about 4 or 5 hours early. We explored the area around the venue and discovered that it didn't have a parking garage, which meant his tour bus was in plain sight. After a couple of hours, a small crowd of about 10 or 15 people gathered, all hoping to catch a glimpse of Manson up close and possibly get an autograph. This tactic had worked for me in the past about 65% of the time. Many people came and went, but my friend and a few others stayed. Finally, about 2 hours before the concert, Manson emerged from his tour bus with a couple of bodyguards. He paused for a moment, and my friend and I were starstruck. But then a rude and obnoxious individual with a large, fancy camera rushed up and asked, "How are you feeling, Manson?" in the most condescending tone imaginable. He attempted to get too close, prompting more security to rush out, surround Manson, and quickly escort him into the building. 3 hours of waiting, all ruined by one little jerk. The photographer took off before anyone could take his camera away. He was clearly an amateur, probably younger than we were. After the incident, we spoke with another girl who had been there, still hoping the kid hadn't ruined our chances of meeting Marilyn Manson. We learned that the kid had pulled similar stunts at previous concerts at that location. Despite what happened, we had a great time at the concert. We would have tried to meet Manson afterward, as that's often the best time to get an autograph, but the concert ran longer than expected and we had to catch the ferry back to Vancouver Island. We missed the ferry and ended up sleeping in the ferry terminal, but we considered it totally worth it. My mom's friend who accompanied us to Vancouver was a bit upset though. If that photographer wanted a close up of Marilyn Manson, he should have just asked for a selfie. I mean, come on, it's the 21st century after all, right? Story 12. I worked in a mall food court downtown throughout high school and college that had its own paid parking garage. All of the food vendors and the parking garage folks had a super not so secret system where any of the parking employees could get a free meal anywhere in exchange for a free parking for food court employees. It worked out perfectly for everyone involved since parking was $8 for the day, and a meal is around $8 anyway. This went on for 2 years until some girl at Panda Express had to go snitch to the actual president of the parking garage company about how she didn't have to pay for parking because everyone just gave the parking employees food whenever. The president then installed cameras in the parking attendant booth, fired 90% of the staff, and everyone had to pay to park from now on. The girl at Panda Express lost her job like a month later anyways. $8 a day to park adds up, especially in the summer when you're working 6 to 7 days a week. Fortunately, I also attended the university that was 2 miles away, so I just parked there with my pass and walked to work, but I'll never forgive that Panda Express girl. Story 13. During my time in elementary and middle school, there was an exciting game we all played in PE, or gym class, called 8-ball. It was a thrilling variation of dodgeball where 8 balls were in play at once. The entire gym was the playing area, except for the bleachers, which were the loser's pit. And the rules were simple. It was an elimination game where everyone, regardless of their group, could join in and have fun. Every Friday was dedicated to 8-ball, and it was always a blast. However, things took a turn when Wayne joined our school. At first, he seemed cool, but he had a habit of not following the rules during 8-ball. He would get tagged, walk towards the bleachers, and then sneak back into the game. One Friday, I was eliminated early and watched from the sidelines. I saw Wayne get tagged, sit down next to me, and then quickly get up to sneak back in. This time, the coaches caught him cheating and warned him that he'd be banned from future games if he didn't stop. He reluctantly returned to the bleachers. As the game continued with only about 12 players left, I noticed Wayne standing near the edge trying to catch stray balls. A large student threw the ball at another player who dodged it, causing the ball to go to Wayne. The coaches rushed over to assess the situation. The following Monday, 8-ball and similar games were banned from our school district. Story 14. I was working in Philadelphia doing deliveries for a catering company. At the end of the day, we'd sometimes have canceled orders and things that had accidentally been prepared twice. Now, the owners were two of the best guys I've ever worked for and decided, hey, why don't we give these delicious filet mignon, mashed red potatoes with roasted garlic, and all this other yummy stuff to the homeless shelter around the block. I bet they haven't eaten like this in years. So we'd take turns at the end of the shift bringing leftovers to the shelter, and the employees in need always got some too, but there were usually multiple trays of high-end food to bring over. We got really friendly with some of the guys at the shelter too. Eventually, we all got called in and were told that the last night's food had been spiked with things. I'd actually gone with my coworker the night before because I wasn't feeling like biking home in the rain. Meaning someone at the shelter, employee, volunteer, or client went ahead with their disgusting plan. It was quickly found out nobody was seriously injured, but who in the world makes someone do that? That was the only reliable brightness some of these guys had in their days, and not just to take it away, but to do so in such a cruel manner is absolutely beyond my capacity. Story 15. I attended a very small middle school where the 8th graders always had a trip to Six Flags at the end of the year. It was a school field trip, typically scheduled a week before graduation, and everyone eagerly anticipated it for years. In my 8th grade class, there was a little person who was very laid back and friendly with everyone. As the end of the year approached, we discussed what we would do for the trip, knowing that if we went to Six Flags, he wouldn't be able to join us on the rides. Surprisingly, he was completely okay with going and didn't want to spoil the fun for everyone else. He assured us he'd be fine doing other activities at the park. We were all excited. However, despite his approval, his mom approached the teachers and principal saying we couldn't go to Six Flags because of his situation. Whether he had changed his mind and asked his mom to intervene, or if she was the one who wasn't comfortable with the plan, we ended up not going to Six Flags. Instead, we went to a water park, which was still enjoyable, but not the same as a Six Flags tradition that had been part of our school for as long as I could remember. I had been at this K-8 school for 10 years. Fortunately, one classmate's generous dad felt bad about the change and treated us to a Hummer limo ride to the water park, which was a nice upgrade from the usual yellow school bus. If you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.